I live in Tijuana, and besides finishing my PhD in urban studies with my doctoral dissertation on criminal economy in Tijuana's real estate market, I have also been neighbor, literally neighbor of the Arellano Felix family, one of their houses, so I actually get to meet them quite well. And I have also been neighbor of Sinaloa Sniper, and currently, sadly, I'm neighbor to an alleged safe house. So this is, I'm gonna show you this presentation with this optics, all right? Oh, first of all, I want to thank the organizing committee for having me, especially Connor O'Reilly and Camilo Tamayo. Thank you for having me. And I would also like to tell you that this research is actually very recent. It has around 8 weeks, no? That we talk about working something besides criminal economy and real estate, on doing something regarding kidnapping and real estate. So this is very recent, and the information gathered has been through local journals, specifically Zeta, Frontera, AFN Noticia, and I don't recall the other one, but basically from this information from 2016 to 2019. So the last case was just 2 weeks ago. And also I would like to highlight that this presentation is complemented with David Shirk's presentation, which he's going to talk on violence on the city as well as San Diego. So please keep that in mind for tomorrow as well as today. And finally, this presentation, since it's really new and I'm trying to work a paper, I'm in the process of doing so, I'm going to put 4 maps, 4 layers differently, starting with the urban one, which is the metropolitan area. As you know, Tijuana is in the northwest side of the country of Mexico and the state of Baja California, which is neighbor also to San Diego, California. California is the 5th most powerful economy in the world. So it's interesting how Tijuana residents have a deep interaction with San Diego. Around 70,000 US citizens that live in Tijuana cross in daily basis to San Diego, either to study or to work. Some of them head all the way back to Los Angeles and back each day. And well, there is a deep interconnection with San Diego, of course. I'm just briefly gonna mention that in Tijuana, there are 2 major cartels operating currently, which will be the Sinaloa cartel. David's gonna talk tomorrow more about that, and as well as Arellano Felix / Jalisco Nueva Generación. So, how do you? So this would be Arellano Felix, as well as this part, and then Sinaloa would be all of this, right, all the way to Tecate. So the second layer would be homicides, homicide trend. We wrote a policy brief last year called The Resurgence of Violent Crime in Tijuana, and I would like to concentrate in this second layer, which concentrates the homicides in the city. They're basically in 3 main sections, would be Colonia Centro, and this is really near to the port of entry to San Isidro, no, the main entrance to San Diego. That will be the first most violent borough. And then we have the second most violent borough. This would be Sanchez Taboada, and this is Camino Verde. So I actually live like right there, no? And then we have a third diffused section would be La Presa, where homicides have increased and keep increasing as we're talking right now due to the drug war in media concepts or simple concepts. Again, I'm not gonna go in deep with the details because David's gonna talk about those, but regarding kidnapping, this is the trend since 2006 until 2017. And you can see back in 2008, 2010, when the trend increased dramatically, and what Connor just talked about. However, as I told you before, when I talked to Fernando Osegueda, which is an NGO leader that is actually a human rights defender on disappearances and kidnapping, he just has told me that around 15 cases per month only in kidnapping has arisen since 2016. So they'll be right here, see? So we have a huge under-registration of this crime. Therefore, we cannot trust the official information due to the lack of what we call cifra negra in Spanish, that can be up to 95 or even 98%, no? Depending on the case. But anyways, I wanted to share that with you. So a third layer would be regarding my doctoral dissertation. I work on how criminality, comprehending this as alleged organized crime members plus corrupt politicians / fraudulent businessmen that don't pay taxes or avoid paying taxes, have used this illicit resource to actually buy houses, commercial buildings, as well as terrains and other mega structures in the city. That is, money laundering can get you to an upper, to another possibilities. So during my research, which is based, I did it since 2015 to 2018, some of the conclusions were that there's actually a geography of criminal power that I call that will be like the city, as well as playas de Tijuana. But then we have 5 different polygons, as you can see. So the green polygon or figure, it's terrains that were bought by politicians. Then we have different polygons around the city. Specifically, this is Chapultepec, Hipódromo. These are really fancy, how do you say that?
Neighborhoods?
No, yeah, but no, the posh neighborhoods. Fresas. So, okay. So we have posh neighborhoods right here, and this is a casino that is historical here. And we have also commercial polygons, which is down el centro, related to prostitution, basically, and hotels, motels. No? Remember, this is the port of entry to San Diego. And the pink polygons or figures are actually those real estate that have been linked to criminal economy in both residential and commercial buildings simultaneously. So you can see, let me go back. You can see homicides as well here. And then you can see the urban infrastructure that goes all the way from San Diego, port of entry. If you go down to the main street, going to a route, all the way to Sonora, and then to the mainland, to the country's mainland, Mexico mainland. So this means that this would be the epicenter, the casino of Agua Caliente or Caliente, you guys have known. This would be the criminal route where the money is mainly laundered, and then we have the criminal members living in there, no? As well, we have found standard deviation in at least 15 boroughs where the residential real estate is not coherent with the urban infrastructure. You know, it's like poor districts with no streets, no water, and yet the market value, average market value of the housing would be with a deviation. So these are the 15 districts that you can see them. It's mainly like Agua Caliente, no? All this part. So you can see the layers are like, then again, it's Centro, Sanchez Taboada, a little bit, not much. It's specifically in Agua Caliente. Going back, there is Sanchez Taboada, Camino Verde, Centro. And regarding kidnapping, Remember, I have 8 weeks working this, okay? So, so we have Sanchez Taboada, Camino Verde, downtown. There's no presence here in downtown El Centro, but it's just really near to downtown, to El Centro. This is the Colonia Castillo, and it's actually linked to smugglers, so they might be actually smugglers in there. But otherwise, you can see that this is a different route, although it connects from the center of the city to the east side of the city. So you can see that it's like, you can see that with the urban infrastructure, these boroughs are attached or really near to main arteries, main avenues, no? So where did it happen? And remember, this is 2016, 2019. Most of the cases were done or were at Playas de Tijuana, Zona Rio, Zona Centro, Boulevard Díaz Ordaz. These are main entries, and besides Playas would be the only posh borough. So it would be really focalized where it's happening, and yet the rescues, that this is important because we can study kidnapping in 3 different states. Where the victim lives, where it actually happened, the crime scene, no? Or where it happened, I mean the rescues. So I am basing this research only in rescues, which means police, state police got into the houses and saved kids, migrants, all the victims, no? So this is also published in the media, at least in 3 media outlets. So I think it's, so you can see it's at least 15 different districts, most of them low class, no? Or this is again Sanchez Taboada, Camino Verde, Reforma. I live right there, no? Then this is really near to Playas de Tijuana. These are some of the real estate related to kidnapping. This one just happened 3 weeks ago. And you can see that it has 2 floors, it's made of concrete, and yet we have another one made out of wood shacks. And so it makes it actually very difficult to work on a prototype of real estate, you know, an alleged prototype. So regarding the preliminary findings, I would like to say that with this information, most of the kidnapping rescues are concentrated in the center east side of the city, really next to avenues, main avenues. In some cases, the kidnapping took place a few blocks away where they were rescued. Also, we have not detected a specific pattern, mentally like real estate pattern. We know that, for example, those safe houses usually put the lights on 24/7, and of course apartments would not make a really good space to have victims. So we're working still on this issue regarding the pattern, because I'm pretty sure there might be an architectural prototype because of money laundering. So I'm pretty sure it's just have to keep working on it. And we're still working on the average real estate market value per district. So the federal government is updating the database, so I'll have to wait until they update the database to have that. And we can divide the rescue zones into 3. For example, foreigners have been rescued around here, as well as teens, young ladies have been rescued in this area, which is Sinaloa territory. And in this side, in the middle of Tijuana, would be related to migrants, civilians, children, women, as well as alleged criminal organized crime members. So this is where it concentrates most part of the victims or the rescues that we know on. Remember, there's a 95% of cifra negra, okay? And this area has been linked to businessmen rescues, all the way over here. So we can divide in general terms the territory. As many of you have mentioned already, analyzing kidnapping in Tijuana as well as Mexico has a high complexity due to the conceptual terms that change very quickly, such as it's kidnapping and then disappearance or forced disappearance, because also police, state members can be behind this. It can be homicide. So it's very difficult to conceptually process methodologically. And there, of course, there is no database, both governmental and private, NGOs even, that is accurately updated and recorded, all the information, because then again, we have at least 95% of cifra negra. And even if they have it, it's not public because it's a really sensitive issue, so it's not public. So this is one thing that we need to work on. Through this experience, we now realize that this crime requires prompt attention and solution. Kidnapping can be subdivided by victims, as we can see now, between criminals. That is, for example, between the Sinaloa cartel, some of the criminals own money because they have not paid on the drugs. So they kidnap them until they paid, or their family pays. So between criminals, from criminals to civilians, and that is to migrants, because it's easy money, no? So someone is gonna tell on information, as las listas that Connor now mentioned, it's not only listas, it's just verbally, you know? Oh, I know someone that can give you 200,000 pesos very easily, and we can, and you can leave me alone because I owe you money, right? So it's from criminals to civilians, and with specific targets, and I'm talking about businessmen, teens or young women, organized crime family members such as Jesus Labra Felix, who was kidnapped just 3 weeks ago in the main artery of Tijuana, and foreign nurses, specifically Korean and US citizens. Now in Tijuana, kidnapping is carried out by both Sinaloa and Tijuana cartels through these young alleged criminals that want to take advantage of the resources that they're operating already to obtain an extra profit. So these cells are part of a structure that it's operating. And yet again, the real estate where the victim is located is usually owned by a third party or an alleged organized crime member that owns the house or the terrain. And as some of you have said already, I believe that kidnapping could be only the tip of the iceberg. The underlying problem could be related to human trafficking. Well, thank you.
All right, that concludes the presentation. Another round of applause for the presenters. And we will get started. Camino's running with questions. Yes, sir.
First of all, Mr. Orozco, I would take a threat as a compliment from the cartels. And secondly, aquí tengo una tarjeta si quieres asilo político.
Well, just I was thinking that if we are not paying too much attention to extortive kidnapping, so in a way I think that what we're talking about here is the things that we can see, right? So in Zulia, I was thinking, well, of course, those you have two options here. Maybe those are the houses that were easier to be checked, right? Those that appear in the center. So you either have like, we call it el problema del borracho, right? So you look for your keys where you can find them, where there's the post, the light, yeah. And the other thing could be that because of the underreporting, it makes sense, because of what you show, the geography of criminal power, that probably the houses are located. Yes, and there's no database. Of course, that's the other issue that you had there. But still, you could think about other ways. So in the way in which you conceptualize kidnapping, you're also now narrowing it down to those that have the resources to have a security house. Mm-hmm. So that means that there's no express kidnapping there? No. Which is, they call it also the Mexican kidnapping. You know, because it was invented in Mexico. It's not el paseo millonario like in Peru and other parts, and it's mainly performed by policemen as they change their turn. No, the kidnappings. So the express kidnappings, and those last around 7-8 hours. So by definition, those are completely outside, and no one has. Not every band has the resources for a safe house. So already you're targeting a very narrow, which could maybe help the analysis, right? That this is just for that type of very organized kidnapping.
They have at least 2 weeks or months.
Exactly. And I mean that I always wondered that the way in which we construct the law and the whole notion of kidnapping is for those kind of high value targets. So you think about the operation for that sort of thing, it means you have a logistic of like maybe 10 people taking care of the ones that are, and I don't know if that's, I mean, thinking in terms of the phenomenon of kidnapping, if that's probably just the little tip of the iceberg for the barrier. And then you would see a lot of organized crime, of course, bands, and yeah, but maybe those are two things to consider. The express kidnapping would never have these.
No, because it takes hours.
Exactly. So then be rescue. So maybe there's another way to tackle those other kidnappings that would not appear in this. And maybe they are linked. They're near the security houses in some ways. I mean, who knows? But I know you were exploring this.
Yeah.
This is just beginning. But while you were making that presentation, all these other types of kidnapping that are not related to real estate came to my mind. And the same happened with intimacy and technologies. So it seems that we are all again on the extortive angle, right? And that's the way in which it makes sense. And then you have all these other kidnappings that are not really, and you were talking about that is difficult to, Jeremy, that it's difficult to talk about disappearances and kidnapping and make the distinction, which is, at least in Mexico, a super heated debate. What constitutes a disappearance? What constitutes a kidnapping? What types of kidnapping can be addressed and what doesn't? So do you think intimacy, I mean, that was a general comment, intimacy can be translated to the other types of kidnapping, or you are just really thinking this theory applies to extortive kidnapping?
I'll save that for when we report back.
Fantastic set of papers. They were just really exciting and interesting. And I've got a couple of things to say, really, to Connor and Camilo, because I found this analysis of ambiguous loss. Oh, actually, I think, Jeremy, you were talking about ambiguous loss, weren't you? That's really interesting, and this phenomenon of the victims being shunned and stigmatized, because some work that I'm doing on looks at the converse of this, which is the denial of victims by so-called ordinary Mexicans who are not affected by a disappearance or kidnapping or whatever. And shunning the victims is really a way for others to manage the cognitive distance from the violence as well. So there's another side of this, which is, this narrative about they must have been involved in something is problematic because it stigmatizes the victims, and at the same time it provides it's like a psychological protective mechanism to ensure that those who are saying, well, if they are involved in something, I'm not involved in something, so it won't happen to me. And it's a way of psychologically managing the co-presence of violence and its everyday nature and the possibility that it would actually do that. So denying the victims is a way of securing the self from the outside. I think I was just wondering, actually, Connor and Camilo, if you've looked at the literature on mobile tech and intimacy, that there's quite a few writers, feminist, STS, science and technology types, who are writing on this, particularly Sherry Turkle and Judy Wiseman. And they are really interesting, and so, I mean, they haven't looked at it in context like this, and I think, there's a really interesting leap that you could make from that work into looking at it in the context of kidnapping, because it adds a whole other dimension. Because they're really interested in looking at the way in which mobile technology facilitates particular affective effects in ordinary circumstances, so in love relationships and in family relationships, and there's the way in which mobile tech generates this expectation of constantly being in contact, and if you don't hear something, then there's something wrong. So it generates anxiety and paranoia and all sorts of neuroses in regular situations. So I wonder, what that does in the kinds of context that you're looking at, whether those things are amplified or whether actually there's, in a way, a simple continuity of those kinds of experiences. And then I think the other thing I just wanted to say, and this is slightly aside, you raised this question, which was the question about doing research on this kind of thing. Because Connor, you were talking about having kidnap training. And when you were also talking about panic buttons and kidnapping apps and stuff like this, researchers are also using these sorts of technologies. And you know, having this sort of awareness, and you know, researchers are also using this tech in a similar kind of way. And I wonder if there's any mileage to be got out of also looking at the role of tech in doing the research, and also the sort of affective experiences of researchers doing work on, you know, distressing material, distressing experiences. But that's a bit of an aside. I know there's a group of researchers in the UK who are looking at some of these kinds of issues, that it might be useful to tap into some of that.
Okay, I'll start. So there's a couple of things. So I'll just go through them in order. On Carlos's point about intimacy feeding into, you know, the notion of the wider psychological impact and long-term and generational. A thing that I saw in a program on Northern Ireland, where I'm from, quite recently said that there's an argument for saying that the whole country suffers from PTSD. And I actually think there's a much stronger argument for saying that about Mexico. And maybe there's something much bigger that can be taken from that about looking at PTSD and the way it's passed on. And I think yeah, intimacy is quite a new theme for us in that we're going through the findings from the 2 fieldwork missions on the border, but we can take it further. On Ernesto's point about the different types of kidnapping and the different temporalities of kidnapping and whether intimacy still applies, right? So in cases of migrant kidnappings, there's people, I've read about cases where people move from being the kidnapped person to being part of the kidnapped infrastructure. And there's an intimacy which occurs there that happens. And even if somebody is taken away like a Levanton and nothing more has happened, there are still ramifications in terms of intimacy. But I agree that even though we're fully conscious of kidnap for labor, kidnap for a sort of forced recruitment, kidnap for body parts, that it's really hard to pull yourself away from the tendency to look at extortionate kidnapping. It's like a gravitational pull that takes everybody away from other forms of kidnapping. That's very difficult. And even in the research process, it's easier to hear the voices of those people who are from the privileged background, who experienced extortionate kidnapping than the others. They're easier to get to, their stories are higher profile. And I guess one of the things I think about from our research was we interviewed a mother and daughter, and the son/brother had been kidnapped and disappeared. And the impact on intimacy in that household, their dislocation from their local community, the impact of the stigma was very, very tangible. And this wasn't the classic extortionate kidnapping. So it is, but we have to work harder to get there. And then, Clara, I take on board all of the points. I don't know the literature, because again, this is a new, but we have to look at it. And in fact, I'll let you talk about technology.
Yeah, no, it just, when Claire said this, I have just 3 ideas that just come up, just listen to you comment. And one is about the role of technologies in time and space and the warm and cold technologies. So basically when you use, I don't know, a mobile phone or any kind of technology, you always like affect time and space. So when we're going to have, hopefully, an Skype in a bit. So this guy is going to be in Europe, going to be here. But one of the things about technology is like how we can play with time and space. And in a kidnapping situation, is basically that, like how a person is removed for your distance, well, you know what I mean.
I just was thinking, when you say like the use of technology in this kind of context, like I want to know, and this could be for our research too, like if a kidnapping negotiation can be conducted by a WhatsApp group, right? So it would be really interesting because, I don't know, in the old times, you just receive the letter, you receive all the stuff, and you put some distance, and the emotional relationship with you and the kidnappers and all the stuff is different if you just conduct all this kind of stuff in a WhatsApp group. And we know all the emotional implications to be involved in WhatsApp groups, right? We have all in the families and all the stuff. So I just wondering if we can have just like this kind of, I don't know, connections in the future in these kidnapping situations through use of this kind of like, I don't know, warm technology. So it's like really interesting to just explore how this technology is going to affect this cold and warm things. That just one thing. And the second is about copresence. I don't know if it's like, I'm never going to pronounce that
You're
word.
right, it's fine.
Copresence, yeah. And it's like how, again, that can affect the socio-dynamics of a kidnapping situation. If you can, I don't know, interact with the person that is kidnapped, maybe by WhatsApp, Skype, or whatever, that is going to change, of course, all the dynamics of the situation. So I'm just wondering how in the future, just technology is going to, I don't know, provide us with a different kind of dynamics and like ways to understand kidnapping in a different way. But again, it just, again, affection, knowledge, and how you create these kind of intimacy situations in this kind of context. And technology is going to be, yeah, definitely keen in on the stuff.
Did you want me to respond? Yeah. Okay. Or do you want to ask real quick? Okay. No, I was just, real quick about that, this idea of psychic distance, cognitive distance. I use a lot of Julia Kristeva for that, right? Thinking of the power of horrors, right? That's one of the performative aspects of this issue of, torture, the photos, the videos, things uploaded makes it non-human, right? That it doesn't look like any, becomes meat and not people, right? And that has creates the ability to really say that, well, that couldn't happen to me because it's not even a real thing, right? And I think that that's a real performative aspect of it, too. And I also had kind of a sneak in a question here about the intimacy thing is, it's an interesting concept, and I'm wondering, can intimacy be unidirectional? Right, and I think one of the points about that I see a lot in terms of migrant kidnapping and this switching between being a kidnapped victim and being a kidnapper, forced recruitment that Kaylin talked about too, is that from a lot of the interviews I've done, it's very much a process of getting rid of the intimacy, putting on a mask, sort of blending back into the group of the other people so that no one knows which one is which. And so a lot of people there that see the people that join, they are unable to locate them, even though they're there still, right? Which ones are they? Things like that are happening. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that. But
Yes, I have a few questions for everybody. It's very interesting, and the issue of intergenerational trauma actually is being studied by a doctor of psychology, Dr. Jan Kisilhan, with experience of the Armenian genocide and also Yazidis. And it provides a lot of evidence on this, so it's something that should be explored to look into how it impacts families of missing persons everywhere. I have a question and maybe a reflection that came from the discussion here. The issue of intimacy with respect to, first, I think during the first presentation by Camilo, you talked about the migrants as this collectivity, right? As that deserves rights. And at the same time, I think we are constantly in the issue of disappearances in its many forms, navigating between the individual and the collective. Because let's say when we're talking about numbers, we look at these masses of numbers, but then we need to look at the individual stories and then understand more the details. When prosecutors try to do investigations, for example, they need to manage the specific case, and at the same time, you also have the massivity of it. when you have a kidnapping and you have this breakthrough of intimacy because of that stigmatization and isolation that they suffer, they may also encounter some solidarity from communities who have suffered similarly than them, that are being created and explored and really driving. So I don't know if I think it would be very interesting to explore also the other components of intimacy that emerge from that victimhood, that could be not so negative, could be the silver lining of it, and actually creating these support networks that reinforce that intimacy. In some states in Mexico, there are very good practices, Coahuila, Nuevo León more older, and Coahuila more recent, where the prosecutors meet with the individual families to review cases. So you have that specific approach to, okay, what are we doing with respect to your case? As I will present later on the ICMP approach, there is also a need to talk about the families as in a mass way, because one by one you cannot solve the case. You're talking about large numbers, so you need to have approaches and methodologies that deal with the large-scale issue of it, and that may break that intimacy because you become one number more. So it would be interesting for me if you reflect a bit on
that. Just one comment about your comment or your question, and is when we start working with Connor about this concept of intimacy, one of the discussions was how we can understand intimacy not just on an emotion, like the orthodox approach to understand intimacy always focus on emotions. So, and a lot of literature about sociology of emotions focus on how you can do a relationship between intimacy and solidarity, affect, care, love, and how you can understand, for our research in situation of kidnapping, all these kind of emotions involved in this kind of context. So one thing is like how, for the future, I guess, like how we can just not approach intimacy in an emotional level, and how we can start to approach intimacy in another kind of perspectives, more like a psychological, anthropological, and not just like for this emotional perspective. So was one thing, but definitely, I'm going to Connor, definitely. Emotions are important in a kidnapping situation, as you said. So when the victims start to mobilize to claim the release of some person, it's just because the sense of solidarity is in the base of that. And when you start, I was thinking, for example, you care of the person where is kidnapped, is your family, because you feel for the person, right? Because of these emotions about love, care, and actually the price, and that's something that for us is really interesting to understand. In the negotiations, like how much you're going to pay for your relative or for you. So it's like a try to commodify the love that you have for the person. It's like, okay, maybe it's 1 peso or 1 million or whatever. But again, it's like trying to do some commodification of love, commodification of intimacy, commodification of everything. And it's definitely a way that we want to explore in this work with Connor. But that's my...